Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's podcast. Our guests today are Marnie Stockman and Nick Coniglio. Marnie and Nick have been on the podcast before, so thanks Marnie and Nick for taking the time. They are the co-authors of The Business of You. I have the book in front of me. Hopefully you can see it here. I bought that on Amazon, so definitely check that out. Uh, we want to talk about the book and beyond the book as well, right? So this is going to be conversation like we had it the last time we talked about a little bit about your other book, Lead It Like Lasso. This one's going to be about the newest book that been out for a week or so, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So welcome to the podcast. We can start with Marnie, a brief intro about you and what you do, and then we can go to Nick and then jump into the podcast.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us again. I started out as a high school math teacher. I landed in administration and used an assessment tool that I ended up working for that ed tech company. So they hired me out of the school system. So if you're in a school, when you go to administration, they say that's going to the dark side. And then if you leave the school system and go to a vendor, that's the double dark side. So I'm two dark sides in. And then the company that I landed in is where I met Nick. So luckiest land in the dark side ever. The company that we worked for together got acquired 3 times until we were working for the largest ed tech company in the world. And Nick said, hey, we should start a company, see if we can get to start a company so we could get out of there. So we did. And that is, we started, scaled, and sold a company. And that's what we talked about in terms of leadership in Lead It Like Lasso. And I'll stop there and let Nick pick up the story with how we landed at what we're doing now.
Thanks, Marnie.
Yeah, thanks, Marnie. And thanks, Krish, for having us back. We're excited to be here. So my background is very different. I'm like the opposite of Marnie. She's an extrovert. I'm an introvert. She's a former educator. I'm a former programmer. But I kind of went from programming to consulting, very much business intelligence, data warehousing. And really, for the last 25 years of my career, I was in technology leadership. That's where I met Marnie, where we were with that ed tech company. And like she said, we started the company, wrote Lead It Like Lasso. And I guess the one thing that needs to be said is we sold that company to really pursue our passion, which is to help people become the best versions of themselves, not through coaching, but at scale. And that was our book, Lead It Like Lasso. And our next book, which you mentioned, thank you, Krish, is The Business of You. And this one's a little different. Our last book was more of workbook style, activity based. This is more written in a fable format. It's a story. And really, it's something that we're excited to talk about because it's all about helping people, specifically people who are stuck in their careers or having a hard time finding their job, or very specifically students who are looking to land that internship, their first job, or even get into college, stand out and differentiate themselves in what's become a very complicated world with technology and automation and AI. So that's kind of what we're all about.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the introduction. I pulled up the book, while you were talking there, and I know we'll include the links to the book on Amazon as well, right? So any other links you would like for us to include, happy to do that. Perfect. I think that sets the premise, and we can sort of jump right in. Let's start with the book, The Business of You. My first question before we go into the contents of it is the title, right? As somebody who's never written a book, I'm speculating that the title is probably important. I don't know if it's like the thumbnail on a video or something along those lines, right? If it is, or even if it isn't, if you could just give an introduction to the title as to why it is The Business of You.
So you'll hear folks talk about how they need to run their life. They need to take ownership of their own life. So we talk about that as being in charge of the business of you. You need to be the CEO of your own life. But a lot of people will say you need to be the CEO of your own life. You need to run your own life. You need to be the boss. But they think of that in terms of, okay, well, the boss just gets to tell everybody else what to do. And we're saying you're not just the CEO of your life. You're you got to take care of the whole business. And that business includes you're your own HR department, you're your own marketing department, you're your chief financial officer, you're your chief operating officer. So that's why we incorporated the whole business of like, because you got to take care of your own business. And then frankly, we believe the most important project they'll ever work on is you. So that's why it's the business of you.
Okay. Nick, anything to add to that?
No, I think Marnie, I'll just give a couple of examples. Most people, when they think about an HR department in business, they think about the applicant tracking system, the hiring, the firing, the compliance stuff. In personal terms, we look at the HR department as knowing yourself, right? Understanding your values, your boundaries, your well-being. And similarly, we look at the other departments just like that. And product development, that's all about your skill building and growth. It's really where you're doing all the training. So we look at every department from a different lens, a different perspective. And I think it's a very unique perspective. And it adds a little bit, especially when we're talking to high school students or college students. While the book is written for everybody, we really feel like that's our calling, is going after young adults in this world. And not a lot of young adults have the acumen to understand corporate lingo. So as kind of a tangential bonus, so to speak, we introduce them to terminology that they will eventually have to get used to if they pursue any career in corporate America or corporate whatever country you're talking about.
Okay. So let's also talk about, in the podcast, we talk about topics that, what people have done, what they've accomplished, and things of the nature. But also, my interest also is in, whether we do our own solo tech podcast, Marnie, Nick, which is sharing how we build software, or something else is how do we go about doing whatever it is that we're doing? Because we know that there are people who want to do similar things, but when you go to a lot of these places, you know that they've done it, but don't exactly know how they may have done it or what challenges they ran into. I can speak to this from a personal standpoint. Having built software for many, many years before we started my own company, I knew how to build software, but didn't quite understand, therefore did not appreciate everything else that needed to be done around the building of software. It wasn't just good enough if you wrote code, good code, and it worked. There was many other things, many other things. Almost every other thing seemed more important at that point than the functioning of the code itself. So part of how we do it is share that experience with our community, so they can learn from it, right? People are interested. So when I'm talking to two authors, I have these questions again as somebody who has not done this, and I know an engineer or a developer or a product owner or product manager or a CTO, whoever is in the community of our podcast, they would benefit from this as well. Whether the book is about business or the book is about engineering, I guess there might be commonalities that probably I'm assuming are applicable, right? So I want to sort of hear from both of you as to blogging is one thing, right? You like something, you write about it, and then people go post on LinkedIn, right? Social media, and there's n number of places. A book is very different. So I want to sort of understand that. Where does that interest stem from? In other words, do you blog and you're like, hey, I'm satisfied, it gives me what I want, but it's not the whole 9 yards that I have to sort of go all out? Or what are some of the factors that encourage you to want to write not just one book, or serial authors, if you will, right? I just want to get your take on this.
Well, I think you're going to love this answer because there might be more commonalities than you think. So I mentioned earlier that it's our passion and our mission to try to help as many people kind of get unstuck as humanly possible, to do it at scale. And in our vision is we don't want to be coaches. We've mentored a lot of people, we've coached a lot of people, but there's really not a lot of scale in doing that. So how do you scale? And a lot of people and companies scale through platforms and technology. So our mission was really to create a mentor in your pocket on the phone to help people have that mentor in their pocket to help them through personal development in a gamified way, so they can do the self-reflection in a fun way through games, through challenges, just fun way, because it's work, right? Self-reflection is work. So our goal was to create an app to do all of that. And we were sitting around at the airport.
Can I tell them?
And yeah, Marnie, please tell, because it's better coming from your mouth.
So we were starting to write the user stories, right? Of what it's going to look like when someone logs into our app. And as we started writing it, we said, whew, this feels like one of those business fables. And at that moment, Nick had to use the restroom, which was right behind our gate. So he went to use the restroom, came right back, and he said, I think I had a terrible idea. And I said, while you were in the restroom? And he said, actually, I think you had a terrible idea. And I said, while you were in the restroom, I had a terrible idea. I mean, it's very possible, but how do you know that? And he said, no, I think we should write a book to define the story, the path someone should take to do the work that will define what the app is going to do. So the engineers on this call will love it, because instead of the product managers are going to go bananas, because instead of writing user requirements, we wrote a business fable about a girl who had a mentor that walked her through the growth she needed and introduced her to an app. And at the end of the book, we asked questions of the authors, like, does the app really exist? We're calling the app Blue. And we said, well, not yet, but it's going to. So we actually have a waiting list for folks that want to jump into Blue. So that's not how our first book landed, but our second book came out because we were writing user requirements for an app. And this was a much more fun way than a lot of lists of, when the student logs in, they will see,
So, okay, that's good. Let's say you have this idea and you have this conversation, right? I'm going to just take it as we build software, right? And try to draw parallels to understand this better. So you have an idea like, hey, Marnie and Nick, get together. We have this idea and we want to sort of write a book, right? That's your initial thought, and you have an idea, you want to convert that into a book. What does that process look like? In other words, if you're building software, you go, like you mentioned, Marnie, from user stories to whatnot, right? You have a path, there's a software development life cycle. What is the life cycle of writing a book? Let's just talk about any book, and then I want to understand how it's different by the book. Like, how is it for any book, and how was it specifically different for this particular book, The Business of You?
Well, I think it started with us with, okay, these are all the interactions that we want an end user, or the reader in this case, to go through and understand, right? We understood that, well, I should take one step back, because we understood the whole notion of the business of you. That was through brainstorming, through all our work with Lead It Like Lasso. We got a lot of feedback around, hey, they love the fact that we related personal development to pop culture phenomena in Ted Lasso. And that kind of stuck with us. But we kept on working and hearing, core values, asking the right questions, storytelling, which was all content within our book. And we were thinking, okay, we've talked about building out, being the CEO of you and the business of you, and that kind of evolved into this department themed structure. And we're like, okay, well, what happens if we have a visitor to a building with 9 floors and 9 different departments? What's going to happen when they go into the HR department versus the product development department versus the marketing, the finance, all those types of things? So we started slotting our personal development activities to every department, which made sense, right? It all makes sense. And when you go to marketing, it's all about building your presence and understanding how do you pitch yourself. When you go to sales, it's all about, demonstrating value and being vulnerable with your prospect. We did have some unique stories, like in finance, we didn't talk about money. We talked about the importance of investing your time, which is a big message that we have in personal development. So we started slotting the ideas to the different departments
into the framework.
Into the framework. And then we started saying, hey, well, we want to make this engaging to a user, so we want to add some mystery. So we started adding some mystery. We wanted to appeal to a younger generation. So we thought about, okay, coffee shops and things of that such, and social media, and being able to hold something on a phone. And then it's a lot of brainstorming, right, Marty? You can probably talk
Yeah.
about the back and forth we have in collaboration in that regard.
So I don't know if you're getting the sense of like how he's talking about iteration in the same way that you iterate code. That's exactly
Right.
what he's talking through, right? You start with a lot of ideas, you build a framework around it, you get that down, you add flavor to it, right? And like you're adding the window dressing and the UI to it. And it really revolves around the problem, which is what he mentioned. We had already done the work on the problem with Lead It Like Lasso. So if you don't have an idea for your story, you have to come up with the big idea, the problem you're solving. And then, like Nick said, we brainstorm back and forth. The very first thing we've done with both of our books is really, let's just dump all the ideas and then let's organize them into that framework. So just like he said, starts with a lot of ideas. It starts with a lot of data. You prune it down into a framework, you slot it in, and then you start making it pretty and user friendly for the user. I really think now that we're talking about it, we've never talked about it this way, but the process of writing the book is very iterative. It's the agile book writing method. Now, some of that might be that there are two of us writing, which I think really adds obviously to the collaboration and the iterating and layering, as opposed to one person that would just, I don't know, do they sit down and plow through it? Have never done it that way. Fortunately, Nick and I have always been able to do that together.
But
Okay,
and I'll just add one last thing, Krish. We also field tested the idea and beta tested it. Like all the principles that we talk about in the book, we have worked with individuals one-on-one, and we've seen them play out. We kind of know where they go off course, and we would tweak, modify. And even with the book, when we had a draft of the book, we field tested it by sending it out to school administrators, to students, to emerging leaders that were existing career professionals, and got their feedback and iterated again and reworked it, tweaked it, tuned it. So when you ask how different it is in terms of product development, I've been on both sides of the house. I've authored 2 books. Marnie has been on both sides of the house, where she's kind of been customer success for a technology platform. Um, it's not very different at all in terms of the approach that I think you're very familiar with.
Okay, that was awesome. I have a number of questions there. And again, to be honest, this is not sort of a manufactured question. It's genuine because, we think a certain way based on the roles we all perform in our professional slash personal lives. And that's the only way we sometimes are able to interpret situations, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think not just to me, even to the audience, while we've explored areas outside of code development in the last 6 to 12, maybe even 18 months with a lot of people, fantastic people such as yourself showing up on the podcast. We've talked about managing a business, sales, marketing, product management. So a whole lot of areas that are related to software, but not essentially core development per se, right? So
Yep.
I've had the opportunity to sort of expand the reach of the audience that we are able to sort of talk to and have a conversation with, even indirectly. So anyways, I'm going to go back to whatever you mentioned. I made points here. I'm going to, this is in no particular order. I'm not great making points while I'm listening to somebody, so I just write down one word and hopefully that word jogs my memory when I go back to
Been
it.
there, done that. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's what the first thing I want to know is tools, right? Let's say, again, this list is in no particular order, but I want to start with that's curiosity, if you will, as to what kind of tools do you use currently as authors of a book? And the second part of the question is, given things that have changed, we will talk about the most important thing these days, which is AI, but I'm just going to do it a little bit later in this conversation. But just ignoring that for a moment, what are the tools that you use to build to write this book, and how has that approach from a tooling standpoint changed from, say, the last book that you wrote? Just in terms of how the technology and things have changed.
So I mean, there's a whole number of tools from the authoring perspective. We heavily rely on Notion. Notion is really the engine that fuels our thoughts, right? So if we have any simple idea, if we hear a quote, if we read something, we'll catalog it in a note-taking system that the underlying plumbing is Notion. That allows us to do a number of things with that. We can take ideas and expand on them, build them out, in terms of writing, organizing them into more tangible units of work. From the writing perspective, we're a Google shop, right? So we rely heavily on the collaboration within Google Docs, Google Sheets, if we're looking to prioritize and analyze and group things together. The authoring is I think is relatively straightforward and simple, right? It's a whole
Good
bunch of
old journal and
collaboration.
pen also.
Yes, absolutely. But I think where it becomes more common with other businesses is, okay, the book writing piece is probably the easy part. And I say that it's not very easy because there's a creativity to it. But then you start talking about all the aspects of publishing a book
Putting it
that
into
become
production.
that become a lot more
Canva.
complicated. Yeah, so a lot of creative type tools. We primarily lean on Canva, like Marnie said, and then there's the whole entire marketing segment of the book, and I'll let Marnie talk about that because she's our marketing guru of the two of us.
Yeah, so there's the market. I mean, we use Canva for a lot of the images, etc. And then all of the social media platforms, is where you really need to put the marketing out there. And then in terms of, so we have had an editor for each of our books, but they use, is it InDesign primarily? Isn't that what we've heard? To get the book in ready-made format. So that is just, Nick and I don't like the last 5% of a project, and the last 5% it involves making sure the margins are just so and the font's just right. So the book gets put into InDesign, and then when we have those files, they get loaded into KDP. We have an audio producer an audio voice talent who did an Audible book. So that lands in ACX. We also use Notion, and then all the scheduling tools for social media for marketing as well. What am I missing, Nick? I feel like you might have had something else in mind for social that I can't come up with.
No, I think you got it all. I mean, I think we've intentionally left out because you kind of teased it a little bit, Krish, with our how we use AI.
Yeah,
And
I
we're happy to
definitely
have that.
left the one of those out. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, because
we'll get to that towards the end, right? But this is good. Whatever you mentioned here, you might be thinking some of this is obvious, but I've learned just by sharing what the little I've known and what I do, what's obvious to one person is not obvious to the other. So even
Yeah.
the tools that you've mentioned here, somebody who's thinking about doing it, that'd be phenomenally useful for them to at least go look up those tools, to just sort of get started.
If you are, I saw on Reddit the other day, I'm in the self-published subreddit, and somebody said, yeah, what would be the one thing you wish you knew before you self-published? A good editor is who it is, the answer would be. We fortunately had one right out of the gate, but I would not try to put my files. Again, I don't like the tedious nitpickiness of all of the very specific requirements, but getting all of the file requirements layouts, to me, that is mind-boggling. But to engineers, that's probably like we call that Tuesday. But for me, that is overwhelming.
Makes sense. So the thing that I want to call out for is in my mind, as a layman to someone who hasn't written a book, the two parts to the puzzle, and tell me if this makes sense. The first part, just highly categorizing this, is the actual content of the book, right? What goes into the book, what goes into the pages, the material is the core, right? That's the heart of the book. But that to me is like talking about engineering and code, right? Without code, software does not function. So sure, you need code. But if I were having this conversation with the both of you, when I was building software and doing just that and not doing the running of the company, I would have only talked about the content, the pages, the words that made it into this book.
Yeah.
But I'm not that anymore, right? I spend a fair bit of time trying to juggle the number of things we have to do as a company. So reaching out, selling and polishing things and doing things that I would rather not do, but I have to do is core to anybody's success, right? So that's where I want to ask my next set of questions. Excuse my use of the word fluff here, right? But I'm gonna use it regardless because I don't know. Do you watch John Oliver? Like,
Oh, I do. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of John Oliver, right? So one of the things we notice all the time is as much as his material is like spot on, I just did this quick, if you just look up some of his videos, the amount of time, let's say it's a 20-minute video or 25-minute piece of content, right? There's a decent number of minutes that John actually spends talking not about the subject matter, right? He has to act. He's very good. He can sing, he can act. He's got all these talents and he puts them on display. And I'm like wondering why, John, I don't want it. I just want the 16 minutes of what you're talking about. And then I realized, well, Krish, not everybody is your age, right? There's Gen Z and we don't understand the language people talk these days. So you have to have those extra 6 minutes. I'm calling it fluff. My apologies to people watching it who don't think that is fluff, but I don't think that's related to the core topic in itself, right? But John does this. It's not just John. If you take anybody else, right, whether it's Stephen Colbert or Seth Meyers, all of these people have this segment where they try to tell you something important, but they're going to have to do the 15% where they're trying to engage you, right? Which I think, as somebody who's an immigrant, but I've been lived here most of my life, so it's even weird when I think of myself as an immigrant. It doesn't mean I was pretty young when I moved here, but regardless, right? The content in other parts of the world, let's say in India or even in England to a large extent, it's very serious, right? The way things are presented. We watch
Yeah.
BBC News, even when they're talking about sports and a team winning. In my opinion, there's a lot of seriousness to it. When I came to the US, the first thing that stood out to me was everything was entertainment, right?
Yeah.
News was I
Yeah.
never thought in my life that news could be entertainment, right? I thought news was like boring stuff that somebody stating the facts.
Yeah.
And when I watch news here, I'm like, man, this is different. I've never watched news like this. So the whole background I'm giving there, I wish I were more succinct, but my apologies, is how much, not this book in particular, I want to ask you in general, when you're writing a book, when you're trying to sell material in your thoughts, how much of fluff needs to sort of be packaged into that material so it gets the reach that it needs? Or can it just be stuff with nothing else that needs to be in there?
So I'm going to say this bit, and then I'm going to let Nick give the real answer, if that's all right, Nick.
Yeah.
So because I do social media, I have some stats around people's preferred communication styles. So I just pulled up my screenshot and I'm going to read it to you. So 20% of folks are hooked by fun, 10% based on their values. So they want to hear, like, in my opinion, or I believe, 10% on imagination, 5% based on action, 30% based on feelings. Like, I care about this. This makes me feel happy. This makes me feel sad. 25%, here you are, Krish. This is you. Facts. So 25% of the people just want the logic, cut right to the chase, but you're only 25% of the world. Or of the, my guess is this study was done in the United States. So
Right.
let's face it. But 20% of the people want fun. And the only thing that's going to hook them is the fun. So that's just in general about people's communication strategies, not to answer your question about fluff in the book. So Nick, go ahead.
Those are amazing numbers, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I think where those numbers come into play for us, I think somewhat in the book, but none of that was intentional, right? In the book, we're just trying to write an engaging story, and I'm sure there's some fluff in that, but it's amazing how much time, again, this is part of being an author. It's about marketing your book, whether
Sure.
you're published, self-published, or go through a publisher. It does not matter because we've gone down both routes. You are responsible for promoting your book. So where all of those stats come into play for us in the time-consuming piece is the social media marketing. right? So we will spend a lot of time debating, talking about actually executing and producing social media content. When you look at it, you're like, okay, that was 95% fluff. But you know what? Maybe it was fun and engaging, but it's hooking a certain segment of our audience that we know will get hooked on it, not because of the facts, but we will present it in some sort of context in some way that says, oh, that's interesting to me. These people are interesting. They offer a unique perspective. Um, so I think that's where, you know, we have a lot of fluff in our lives, to use your term, Krish, but almost all of it, from at least my perspective, is around how to engage with the different audience types that Marnie referenced earlier. And it, as the engineer in me, that drives me nuts. But the business person, the entrepreneur of me, that realizes that that's a fact of life. And I don't need to look further than my house, because we all interpret and we process things differently, and that's a great representative sample of who we're trying to reach with the messaging of this book.
And the fluff is the story a lot of the times, right? You could just give a fact, but one fun stat for you, since I now know you're the fat guy, is stories are 22 times stickier and help you stand out more than just a fact. So hundreds of people could put the same quote on LinkedIn, but it's someone that's got the interesting story behind why that's true that will stand out to someone else, which is what Nick and I talk about in the Business of You, is that you've got to be able to tell your story. You better have some fluff, because do you know how many resumes are out there that said, I graduated high school, I graduated university, I had a degree, right? Like, you've got to have that fluff. Is what's making you interesting. That's your character.
I think beautifully said, right? That is the character, because how do you stand out? And again, we'll come to AI soon enough, but things are going to change, right? We are at an inflection point in many different ways. This year or this period of time, I tell my wife all the time, I'm glad this happened now, not 25 years later, because then you'll just be retired and looking at things that passed us by. But to people who have been building software for like 2 decades and are at this point where, oh my God, do I have to do things differently, very differently? And there's this anxiety and even sometimes panic when I talk to people, and I'm like, look at the other side, the positive side, because that is the only way to look at least for me, which is, if this didn't happen now, how does it benefit you? It would have happened anyways at some point. You just have to be blessed that it happened to you and your life coincided with those types of things, right? There are people that you like where the universe put you in a frame where you happen to live, coexist with them, even if they don't know you. Like, I'm
Yep.
happy that I coexist in a world where Quentin Tarantino is still making movies, and I don't know why he's only going to make one more, which is bothersome, but he's still made, and I'm watching them like repeatedly, right? So what you said there, the character, I think is very important. And I want to sort of make that very clear in your language as well, Marnie and Nick, because people watching this, most of our audience is in the US and Europe, but we're trying to reach Asia and Southeast Asia and other parts of the world as well. And the cultural differences sometimes have to come across from people doing that particular job. You read it, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. You have to hear it from the horse's mouth per se. So I want to sort of give the impression that whatever it is that you share, that the entertainment aspect of it needs to be there, right? Whether it's engineering or science or arts. Otherwise, like you said, people are going to be like, you know what, this is boring. It's not a story. You don't stand out. It's the same resume with the same skills everybody has, and it doesn't make a difference. Okay, perfect. Next thing I want to ask is footage. I say footage because let's say you're making a movie like, I don't know, Inglorious Bastards. He has like 4 hours of footage, and then you make it 2 hours. And you talked about the editor, right? So this book, say right now, it's give or take, outside of the epilogue, it's 175 pages, right? Ignoring fonts and sizing and all of those aspects. Let's say you took the number of words. How do you arrive? I mean, do you write like 340 pages that then becomes 170? Or what? How much footage or material do you need to actually get what you eventually publish?
Well, because we iterate,
Uh-oh.
I don't know that we never write 500 pages that turns into
Marnie,
200
can you hear me?
pages. We might, but I would have no way of doing that without going and printing out every single Google, resaved from this minute to that minute, because we might have chunks that we kind of decide to rewrite and delete a good bit of it along the way. So it's so iterative that at no point could I say our full, in Lead It Like Lasso, I can remember we started thinking about how marketable and consumable the book would be, and we said, okay, we're gonna trim this down, but we've never thrown out 9 completed chapters and said maybe that'll be book 3. Nick, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that my connection froze, so I didn't hear the entire
Oh,
question, but
okay.
and I'm
Oh,
sure
no.
you answered it perfectly.
So he said, like, how long is the full book and how much do we prune out? And I said, we've never thrown out any market ready content because we iterate along the way. And by the time we're done a chapter, we rarely make a large edit or prune once we've gotten, because we could just re-go through all the
Yeah,
sections.
I think that's safe to say. And I think we're more the exception than the rule in that regard in terms of authors, at least in speaking to other authors. This one, again, we wanted to simplify things so it would be really accessible and understandable no matter where you are at across the spectrum. So we definitely wanted to bring across streamlined content and make it a quick read. I think we probably had a lot more content. Maybe this is where you're going with Lead It Like Lasso than we did with this particular book. So not a lot of footage, which is where I dropped off, was left
You
on
picked up
the
nicely.
left off on the chopping room floor in the
So in other
movie
words,
studio.
so you didn't have to make some of those difficult decisions where you wrote a whole chapter and you're like, you know what, I like this, but it increases the length of the book, so we're not going to have it, right? Nothing like that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now for both books, we've written a solid chunk of it and then ended up rewriting it almost from scratch, because Nick and I are all about defeating the blank page, right? You got to get something out there so you can edit it and see what you like. I can remember Lead It Like Lasso, we had 20 typed Google pages, so that's quite a bit of a book, and then came up with a totally different sort of take on it, tone, and we rewrote that. Not so much was written in the business of you, because we got better about like knowing how we wanted to brainstorm at the beginning. But yeah, we've never thrown out a good chapter for length, for sure.
Perfect. Okay, the next thing I want to ask is the style and language, right? Now, I'm assuming that's an important decision as well, because you make a decision on, hey, here is the demographic I'm going to sell the book to. They're located in this part of the world. Let's say it's a US audience. So the book is written in English, but the style, what words you use, how people understand it. Because, if you I looked up a video the other day with Gen Z language and Gen Alpha. I mean, I could sit there, it's hard enough as an immigrant to understand regular English most of the time. And you don't want things to become even more complicated. Where I was there at the restaurant the other day and one of the guys came up like, what's shaking? I was like, okay, I'm sure this means something. I have no idea. And I'm going to just ask you what it is, right? So how do you make those decisions? I know Nick mentioned earlier, while it's good for everybody, you also have the college graduates in mind. So do you pick language, verbiage, and words that particularly resonate with that audience?
I don't think we went to some extent. It's funny. We have a newsletter that it's sarcastic, and we've written like sarcastic articles, or snarky was a better way to say it, right? Snarky articles about the not under as an adult, me 54 years old, not understanding the lexicon, the euphemisms of Gen Z and the younger generations, like cap or no cap, right? Truth or no truth, or not false. There are certain things that we certainly don't understand. So we did not take it to that level. But at the same time, the scene, the setting of the book was very much targeted at younger people, right? We do a lot with somebody sitting in bed working on a laptop. We do a lot with working in coffee shops and hanging out in bookstores and things that my 21-year-old son, Marnie's 20-something-year-old children are very much used to. We also, the learning experience itself, we talk about Sydney, the lead character, using gamified applications, right? Something that the younger generation is very much used to. We don't go as far as alienating people of my generation, um, but but we put it in a setting and a scene that I think younger people are very comfortable with. So much so that there are some words and styles of the actual text that our editors are like, this does not conform to the whatever.
At MLA's Chicago style standards. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're like, we don't care.
Yeah. We're
Spell
going to
all
leave it.
right, ALRIGHT, because that's how the younger kids spell it, not with two
Yeah.
words, all
Yeah.
space right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So those are, I think you answered that perfectly. I don't want to try and summarize it and do a poor job summarizing it. I'll go to the next one here. The scope creep is one of them, right? When you're building software, we have an intent. We know what we sort of want to build, but then we have this issue with scope creep where things, there's one of the videos I'd watched where the husband comes, the wife is doing dishes and he's very nice and romantic, if that's the word. He's like, yeah, I'll take care of this. And there's like two dishes in the sink, right? And then she's like, yeah, sure. And then when he starts doing it, she comes around and she dumps like 40 other dishes. And it's a very funny video. I want to understand scope creep. How do you, like, when it's software, we kind of imagine what the page should look like, or as an API company as well, we know what the API's endpoint should look like, and we work towards that. And then we have some ways to manage scope creep. When it's a book, I'm trying to imagine, and I cannot imagine, because how do we know how thick the book should be, right? Or let the material define it. But if you let the material define it, maybe you could write 1,000 pages about the business of you, but then you would be like, hey, you know what? I want to keep this to this particular length, for instance. So how do you handle that, and how does it happen in a book writing world?
So extrapolation, it's like you start and get a sense for the first couple of chapters, and then you think through, okay, it would 9 iterations of comparable units get us to a reasonable amount. So we know a typical word count that we're going for. So we knew we wanted the books around 200 pages. So they have comparable word counts. I mean, that's a bit of it of, okay, we keep an eye on that. I saw somebody on Reddit the other day said, well, I've gotten to, I think they said 300,000 words. Now do I start pruning? And I thought, oh my gosh, 300,000 words. That's like 6 books. But they were writing a fantasy book. So I think you have to have an eye on the prize in that regard. And Nick and I always define sort of what we want. First, we always say, what does success look like? And we think that for the book. And so scope creep stops by knowing what the end in mind is. But then in each chapter leading up to that, we know what success looks like. So in each smaller unit, right? I guess it's like a little sprint. Each of our chapter sprints, one of our chapters is not 50 pages and one of our chapters is 2 pages, because we kind of balance it that way. Nick, when I said what does success look like, you smiled. Was that because that was what you were thinking, or because I said it wrong?
Yeah, that's something we ask each other all day, every day. And I think Marnie described it perfectly well. I think another benefit. So the only downside to, in my opinion, to having co-authors, more than one person write a book, is you have to match the tone from author to author. That is something you have to watch out for. I think beyond that, it's all positives, because we hold each other accountable for making sure that we don't step over the line of what we set out to accomplish at the very beginning. And it helps that we approached it more like software, in that we spent the time at the beginning defining what we wanted the outcome to be.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of authors start with an idea and they create magic from that idea that turns into 1, 2, 3, 4 books, which I am envious of. I think that's fantastic. I love the Lord of the Rings, or all those books that have
Trilogies and
multiple versions or iterations. But we had a very focused goal with this project, and we held ourselves accountable to not going beyond what that goal was.
I was going to ask about collaboration, but you already answered that. So you must have seen my cheat sheet here. That was the next bullet I had here, is to the extent possible, right? I know, when you're doing it with another person, then you have to do things surely a little bit differently. But that just depends. You've written other books before, so that's a natural. So should we just look at it as a team? When you're a team, you make some compromises independently or individually. So the collective sum, the sum of what you produce, you want that to be the best version, right?
absolutely.
Not the independent version.
And it
Okay.
really does help for accountability. Whereas if you're writing it by yourself, deadlines slip, etc., but not if you're holding yourself accountable to someone
Plus,
else.
it's like to me, I look at it as a code review, right? When two
Yeah.
people are co-authoring a piece of code, you naturally have somebody giving you feedback
Yeah.
because it needs to
Yep.
be better. If you did it yourself, it's not gonna, it's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get to AI. I know it's 5:29. Do you have a few minutes? How does
I have a couple minutes.
Yeah, I've got about 5 or 10 more minutes.
Okay, we'll wrap up in the next 5 minutes then, right? So this question is generally on everyone's mind on any topic. Things have changed quite a bit with AI, right? And especially with Gen AI, writing has changed dramatically, right? More than anything else, if you ask me. So playing the devil's advocate, somebody's thinking, hey, you know what? Why do I have to write something if I have a prompt that's good enough? Can I not rely on tools to generate the content as opposed to me writing? That's my basic question, right? Writing up until this point was an author and a writer thinking about a topic, coming up with words and putting that on a piece of paper or digitally or whatnot. That may or may not be the same anymore. I want to get each of your thoughts on that. What does it mean? What is the impact of AI, and how much of a book does a human need to write versus the tool doing it for us by prompt engineering?
You want to go more?
All right, I'm going to start with part 1, which is in Adam Grant's book, Hidden Potential. He talks about, in a world of automation and digital transformation, that we're in the midst of a character revolution. It's your human elements that will make you stand out. So I just say the same thing for writing. If everybody can get the same or comparable response with AI, then the only thing that's going to make your book stand out amongst all of that is what you truly bring to the table. So Nick, what say you on that?
No, I of course absolutely agree with that, and I think the notion of AI to me it's the most exciting thing that's ever happened in my lifetime. I think without a doubt, we use it on a daily basis to help us either A, do research, or B, really help us from our marketing and social media
Brainstorming
ideas.
marketing ideas, yeah.
Yeah, and what I can tell you from that experience is while we rely on it heavily, it produces so much noise and crap, excuse my language, that it's really hard to verify, and we have verified that, hey, some of these things is just, some of the information it outputs is just flat out wrong. So I think in general, authors are not like us. They don't come from technology companies, and they are completely against the whole notion of AI. I think Marnie and I view it very differently. I think it's a very important tool. But again, the human aspect of it, just like Marnie said, is what we feel like we bring to table. I don't think, and I'm just going to go back to Lead It Like Lasso, I don't think, through AI prompts, we would have ever gotten to the notion of, hey, let's use pop culture TV show like Lead It Like Lasso to represent personal development leadership concepts. Why? Because AI is trained on looking at everything that's always been done before, and something like that has never been done before. And we feel like with the business of you, in setting this up as a parable, thinking about your personal development from every department within a business is so new and unique. I feel like to us, that's the magic of what we're bringing to the table. And, I just don't think AI could have done it. I think if AI would have done it, that would have done it wrong. I've compared like some of the things that we've written in Lead It Like Lasso to what AI would develop, and AI gets the scenes wrong, gets the characters wrong, it hallucinates and starts thinking about something completely different. So I think if you're looking for trust, originality, creativity, I think the human form with maybe a little bit of co-pilot with AI is the way to go. But the problem I really have with AI and authorship is that it's created so much noise out there. It's really hard to find valuable pieces of work because there are goo-gobs, technical term, of books out there that have been written by AI, and they're absolute junk. And it's making good pieces of work harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
Very well said, right? Anything else, Marnie, as closing comments before we call it?
I would just say, as the co-pilot piece, if there are two authors, it is nice to we can put both of our writings together and say, like, where does this seem inconsistent? So it's good for pattern sorting within work that we've written. So that's the one place where it's handy for co-authors to use it.
Amazing. Anything I've missed that you want to quickly say before we call it wraps?
No, thanks for having us. We we're looking forward to it.
Thanks
for taking the time. We'd love
time.
people to check out The Business of You. It's on Amazon.com.
Yeah, I am going to include the link to the book, and the one I pulled up, I think that's I found it on Amplify Publishing Group as well, right?
Yes.
So,
that's us.
So if there's other links that you want for us to include, do let us know. But otherwise, thank you very much again, folks. It was great talking to Marnie and Nick. I know little about writing books. I'm sure a lot of you were in that same position, but I think this is going to at least help you get your thoughts around what do I need to do if I have to start writing something or anything. And I think I tell this to developers. The last thing I would say is, on top of writing code, I think writing in general, I think has helped me personally sort of write better code. It gives you a way to collect your thoughts together and see how we can put it. And when you do that, it doesn't matter what the topic, no matter the topic, it does help in other sort of facets of life. So I would highly encourage that people give writing a shot if they're not already doing that. Awesome. Thank you very much, Marnie and Nick, co-authors of The Business of You. Definitely check out the book on Amazon, and we'll include links. Thanks.
Thanks.